Hi, I'm Dr. Phyllis Books, and I have with me today Dr. Tom O'Brien, author of The Autoimmune Fix. He's also just happens to be an expert on health in general, but gluten and inflammatory processes, and he has a lot of experience, and we'll talk before we finish about his new documentary, Betrayal. So, and my book is Reversing Dyslexia, and I work with dyslexics and ADHD, and what I'd like to talk with Dr. O'Brien about today is the role of nutrition and poor nutrition and how it affects learning and behavior in children and adults. So, where shall we begin?
Well, why don't we start in lectures I give, I'll ask doctors to cross their legs. Please cross your legs. And I wait for them to do it. Come on, cross your legs. And then they do. And I'll say, leave your legs like that for 3 hours. Now stand up and run. And they can't because there's not enough blood in their legs, right?
Right.
Because the legs have been crossed for quite a while. So there are 14 different mechanisms that I am aware of by which a sensitivity to foods may cause a lack of blood flow into the brain. It's called hypoperfusion, big Scrabble word. With wheat, for example, in the Journal of Attention Disorders, they published a study in 2006, and they showed with 130 attention deficit hyperactivity disorder children, every child or their parents reported significant, that's a critical word from researchers, because they're geeks, they're not English majors, you know. When they say significant, they're trying to tell us this is really important.
Right.
Every child or their parents had every child reported or their parents reported significant improvement in all 12 DSM-4 markers for attention deficit. All 12 markers. Fails to pay attention, interrupts frequently, blurts out answers, can't sit still, disrupts the class. Every marker improved in every child when they went wheat-free.
Listen to this, parents.
And the researchers summarized at the end and said, we have no hesitancy saying that every child with attention deficit just needs to be checked for a sensitivity to wheat, as it's such a common trigger. So it'd be nonsense to say every attention deficit child has a problem with wheat, but it's rational to say every attention deficit child may have a problem with wheat. So you just want to check, because if they have that, neither the drugs, the Adderall, the Ritalin, which is just putting gasoline on the fire, none of those drugs will have the benefit that they potentially could have if the child is still eating a food they're sensitive to, causing hypoperfusion. And the amount of hypoperfusion was 73% of the children with the sensitivity to wheat had hypoperfusion on average a third of their brain.
That 1/3 of the brain was actually affected.
That's correct. 1/3 of the brain was not getting enough blood flow into it. So cross your legs for 3 hours, stand up and run. You can't. So a third of the brain is not getting the blood that it needs in there, so it can't function on all 8 cylinders. It just cannot function no matter what. And the drugs cannot make a difference. It's kind of like everybody's had the experience. You back out of the driveway, and the car's not moving the way it's supposed. Well, why is it? It's moving, but it's not moving very well. Oh, wait, the emergency brake's on. And then when you release the emergency brake, now the car moves freely. So if you have a lack of blood flow into the brain, it's the emergency brake on that child's brain. They just can't function normally. These are the one of the clues. These are the parents that say, my child is so smart, but they just can't get school, or they just don't do well on tests.
Or they do well some days, but not others.
Exactly.
They don't understand the inconsistency.
Yeah, the day that they get eggs for breakfast, as an example, they do great. The day that they get pancakes for breakfast, they don't. Now that could be the wheat, that could be the sugar, the excess carbohydrates. There's a lot of things it could be, but that's the kind of trigger.
Fascinating. I want to ask you an equivalent question about sugar. I know that wheat is your is one of your fortes, but sugar is also an inflammatory agent, is it not? Could you talk about sugar and its effect on behavior?
Sure. In our book that just came out, The Autoimmune Fix,
Here we are.
what great, thank you. What we recommend is just try this for 3 weeks. No wheat, no dairy, no sugar for 3 weeks. Because they're the three big ones.
Yeah.
They're the big kahunas. There are others
Totally.
that can be a problem, but they're the big kahunas. And when you try that, and completely, don't dabble, do it completely, most people notice a difference. Sugar, the types of sugars available today, the problem is not the kick that it gives you. The problem is the deep dive you take, the rebound effect.
Right.
Everybody feels good when you're kind of pumped up on sugar a little bit, but it's the dive that you take, your brain takes, so then we automatically crave more sugar.
Right.
And when we ride that roller coaster again and again, the result is that we develop what's called low blood sugar, and that can progress into insulin resistance. It means insulin's not working so well anymore, and your body makes enough insulin, but it doesn't work so well, so you have all these blood sugar problems, and that's the primary mechanism that leads eventually to the number one scourge in our country today. This got everybody so worried, and that is obesity and diabetes.
Oh, that's a bigger and bigger issue. Absolutely.
And the mechanisms of that are clearly associated with excess sugar. There are many, many studies on this.
Yes, yeah, it is really epidemic proportions. Can you talk about it in terms of children's ability to concentrate?
They can't.
There it is.
So first one is food sensitivities and the lack of blood flow into the brain, called hypoperfusion. That's a primary mechanism. The second most common mechanism that I see clinically in practice is the blood sugar roller coaster ride, because the primary fuel of the brain is blood glucose or blood sugar.
Right.
And blood glucose is primarily impacted by the sugar that we eat, all the OSAs, the sucroses, white sugar, the fructose, the maltose, the lactose, all of those OSAs we eat cause our blood sugar to rise and then crash. When it crashes, when your blood sugar goes low, there's not enough fuel for the brain.
Right.
So your brain can't function. It's kind of like you're on the reserve tank on your car, and the car's starting to spitter and sputter. You go, oh my gosh, I've only got 4 blocks to go. The gas station's 4 blocks away, but the car's spittering and sputtering here, and you don't know if you're going to make it that 4 blocks, right?
Right.
That's the way it is when the blood sugar crashes. There's just not enough fuel for the brain cells to function the way they're supposed to.
And I think that's when people make poor decisions.
It's not a decision anymore, it's survival.
Right.
That there's a survival mechanism. When your blood sugar goes low, there's a message, there's an area of the brain that's monitoring that, and it sends a message down the spinal cord to the adrenal gland saying, I need sugar, I need more sugar now. And your adrenal gland secretes something called glucocorticoids.
Yes.
They're hormones made by the adrenal glands that are designed to bring your blood sugar up. So your brain is trying to get the fuel that it needs one way or another.
I don't know if did you ever hear, there's a lady wrote her PhD on the biochemistry of crime.
Oh.
And it's a lot to do with blood sugar issues. When people's blood sugar is at its low, is when they commit heinous crimes or when they make poor decisions.
Well, yeah, because it's no longer a decision. Well, I guess it is a decision instead of a choice.
Right. Rational choices.
Rational
which
choices.
means that all of your brain is working.
That's right. It's not possible to have your brain working well when you're in a low blood sugar state.
Right.
You really have to consciously force yourself to process information accurately. You have to recognize your brain's in a low blood sugar state. Okay, I'm in low blood sugar right now. I can't get to food for a little while, but I have to make these decisions. So let's really focus here, drive hard, as opposed to just doing what comes next.
Right.
When you have adequate blood sugar, you don't think about the decisions you make. You just do what's next automatically. But when you have low blood sugar, when you do this, it's always in survival mode. And it's to get more sugar. That's the primary purpose of response mechanisms in low blood sugar, is to get more sugar so you get more fuel to your brain.
Right, which creates this chaotic,
The roller coaster.
the roller coaster effect. So, great. I wanted to ask, you said 30% of the brain. Do you happen to know what third of the brain is affected?
Well, it always affects the frontal lobes, always, and it will affect some other areas. So if it affects the occipital lobes in the back, those people get seizures. If it affects the parietal lobes, those people can't think really clearly. If it affects the frontal lobes, and every one of them had frontal lobe involvement plus other areas, but the frontal lobes are your emotions.
It's also some executive function.
Anxiety, depression, those emotions are in the frontal lobe. Executive function is parietal and cerebral, just the whole cerebellum may be engaged also.
I notice with children that the cerebellum is very involved in their coordination and their confusing right and left, and are just, they're kind of klutzy kids sometimes. And could you comment on that?
Yeah. 26% of people that have a reaction to wheat also have a reaction to their cerebellum, meaning
Really?
the immune system is attacking their cerebellum. So there's inflammation in the cerebellum. And
Very important.
the cerebellum coordinates motor coordination and balance. So when you've got inflammation in a tissue, it won't work optimally the way it's designed to.
Right.
It'll be compromised, and it might be 5% compromise or 75% compromise. It just depends on the amount of interference that the inflammation is causing.
So the 26% will go to the motor function, but are there statistics on what else it does?
22% of people with a sensitivity to wheat will have a reaction to myelin, which is the saran wrap around your nerves. Now, if you take the wire that goes from the battery to the headlight of the car, and it's got insulation on it, and if in the middle there you take off some of the insulation, so the wire's still connected, but you've taken off some of the insulation, now have the exposed wire where you took off the insulation touch the frame of the car, the lights start flickering on and off. And you say, what's wrong with the lights? There's nothing wrong with the lights. They're just not getting the juice that they're supposed to because it's shorting where the insulation's been taken off. That's MS. Is the saran wrap around the nerve, the myelin around the nerve, has been eaten away by the elevated antibodies to myelin. And so the lights are flickering. And it just depends on which nerve you're talking about as to what lights they are. Are they the lights to executive function and thinking? Are they the lights to motor coordination? Are they the lights to vision? It just depends what part of the brain is the vulnerable area of the brain to that inflammation.
That brings me, like sensory processing disorders, it's very common, more and more common with children. And so that they're hypersensitive, they don't want anything close to their skin, or anything. Could you comment on that?
When you read the studies on kids with autism, and when they check the blood flow into the brain, the kids that have hypoperfusion, the lack of blood flow into the right side of the parietal, they all have autism with repetitive motion.
Oh, right.
When you check the left side, if they all have, that group of children that all have a lack of blood flow into the left side of their brain, they all have sensitivity to touch. None of them want to be touched. So it just depends on what area of the brain is affected by the lack of blood flow, the emergency brake. What area of the brain is affected by that lack of blood flow as to what the symptoms are categorically. And you see that when they looked at it in the studies, it was practically every child that had this category of symptoms had the same area of their brain with a lack of blood flow. This category of children that had the same symptoms had this other area of the brain with a lack of blood flow. So the lack of blood flow, you don't treat, my comment is, if your car is blowing black smoke out of the exhaust pipe, you don't treat the exhaust pipe. So if your child has a sensitivity to touch, you don't treat the sensitivity to touch. You of course want to do your best you can, but where's it coming from?
Right.
And so you have to look and see, where's it coming from? And we see things like sugar and dairy and wheat are the triggers that most common triggers causing the lack of blood flow, the hypoperfusion into the brain, which contributes to, it's not the only cause, but it's a common cause, contributing to the symptoms that child's presenting with.
Excellent.
So the first thing you do is stop throwing gasoline on the fire, meaning find
Good
out
point.
find
Good
out
point.
what are the things the child is sensitive to. Get them out of there. And then just notice the results. Like in 132 kids with attention deficit, every single child improved on a gluten-free diet. In all 12 markers. If this were a drug, it'd be on the front page of every paper in the country.
Right.
You know, but there's no profit in this, so
Yes,
there's no
yeah.
marketing of it.
Yes, very big point. When you say to go gluten-free, moms look at me in the eye and go, no goldfish, no cereal, no bread, like that, I don't know what to feed my child. So do you have any comments on how people can, how they can make this big change?
Yes, it depends on which peptides of wheat the person's responding to. If it's the gluteomorphins, those bind on opiate receptors in the brain, and so people, their withdrawal symptoms can be severe. So if they have elevated antibodies to gluteomorphins, you baby step them. Mrs. Patient, if it takes you a month, that's fine. If it takes you a month, so just start with breakfast. Let's start with every other breakfast is going to be gluten-free. Here's a bunch of recipes for breakfast that kids like, and alternate them. So one day they can have their favorite, the next day you have this, and then next week, every third day they're having wheat, and then next week every fourth day, and by 5 weeks down the road, all breakfasts are gluten-free. Then you start with lunch, and you just work them up into foods that they'll like. Because some people have a reaction to going wheat-free.
Well, it's a big shock to some
It is.
people.
It is. And the most important thing, I think, just in general principles, is don't try and reinvent the wheel. Bring a specialist in who guides people. That's a nutritionist or a dietitian. Bring a specialist in and let them guide you in how to do this.
Great, great. So what would you say, what would be like the 3 best foods and the 3 worst foods for people to eat?
The 3 worst foods? Wheat, dairy, and sugar.
Yeah, that's true. And dairy would include ice cream, yogurt, milk.
Anything from the udder of a cow, except butter.
If people actually realize what all comes from cows, I think we're so removed from that today.
That's a good point. Cream,
Yes.
cheese, ice cream, yogurt, butter, sour cream.
And just cheeses, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, which when I became vegetarian for a while, like, okay, as long as I can still have cheese.
Now, for people who are listening and say, oh my God, cheese, I mean, if that's the one that catches you, that absolutely is what you have to get rid of. Because your brain's, oh my God, not cheese, I love cheese. Well, there's a reason why you love cheese, because the foods we eat are stimulatory. You feel good when we eat foods that we're sensitive to.
Excellent.
The lucky people are the ones that get sick when they eat it. Because you can't argue with them. They know when they eat this, they feel sick. The unlucky ones are the ones that don't get sick. That it's affecting their brain and they just can't tell, as opposed to affecting their gut and they get stomach pain.
Right, right. You know, I think of that, the thing about putting a frog in boiling water, he'll jump out.
Right.
But if you warm up the water slowly, and it's that way when you eat incorrectly, but you don't know it because you're used to it, and your signals don't really register after a while.
We're used to living with less than 100% of our brain functioning. You know, if you have hypoperfusion, some parts of your brain are not working very well. We're used to that. We're used to operating with the emergency brake on our brain. And we think, well, you know, we're doing the best we can. And, you know, we just rationalize, I'm doing the best I can. But then when you go gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free for 3 weeks, all of a sudden, it's like someone turned the lights up.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we see revolutionary changes. In behavior, in sleep patterns, most, like grown-ups, lose weight because they're not eating these foods. So let's talk about inflammation for a minute, because that's a big part of your autoimmune thing. So would you just address that whole concept of like autoimmune diseases and inflammation?
Every disease at the cellular level, as far as we know, every disease is inflammatory.
Yes.
That means the cell's on fire. The question is it a brain cell or a kidney cell? Is it gasoline or kerosene? And when you think of things that way, it seems simplistic, but it really is, and it works. So when you start asking those kinds of questions, okay, is it gasoline or kerosene? Well, what does that mean? It means you have to do some testing to find out where your sensitivities are.
Mm-hmm.
Is it heavy metals or is it toxic chemicals? Is it mold in the house? Where's the trigger coming from that's the gasoline on the fire causing the inflammation?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't treat the inflammation. Of course, well, you do. You want people to feel better. So you've got inflamed joints, your joints hurt. So you of course, want to treat the inflamed joints. But the question is, why are my joints inflamed?
Exactly.
Where's that coming from? Where's the gasoline coming from that's causing the fire? In autoimmunity, that's why we have the our betrayal series is coming out. I traveled the world in the last year. I have about 160,000 miles now, air miles. Great Britain 3 times, Lisbon, Barcelona, Madrid, Leipzig, Germany, interviewing the world leaders on autoimmunity, asking these same types of questions of the world's leading researchers, the people who are on the cutting edge doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And we put it together in a series that will air soon, November 14th, for 7 days. It's free online, and it's called Betrayal. The autoimmune disease solution they're not telling you. And what people are going to learn is where the gasoline is coming from, causing the inflammation for the diseases they have. Cardiovascular disease is autoimmune. Cancer is autoimmune. Then there's the ones we know more directly associated, like rheumatoid and psoriasis and lupus and multiple sclerosis and all those. But because cardiovascular disease and cancer are autoimmune, that means that this is the #1 mechanism for getting sick and dying in the world, is your immune system attacking your own tissue. And what we're talking about is why does that happen? And foods are a big part of it. The wrong foods are a big part of it.
Yes.
Why does that happen? How do we identify it? And what do we do about it?
Right, because I think most people don't make the connection. If they don't, for instance, if they're eating gluten and they don't have a big reaction, they'll go, it doesn't apply to me. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, those are the ones that unfortunately don't feel gut pain when they eat it. What they've got is brain fog.
That's true.
Or joint pain.
Yeah.
Or just fatigue. So they just don't associate, oh, I'm tired. It's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I need to take a nap. They don't associate that it's what they ate for breakfast that could be triggering that.
Right. To me, that's a really big thing about this autoimmune is people don't make the connections between what they ate or what their actions are and the symptoms because they're not necessarily close together.
That's what we talk about in Betrayal in a lot of detail.
All right, we just had a question come to us, so I'd like to ask Dr. O'Brien, and that is, could you suggest some gluten-free foods that people will actually eat and that might be attractive as you segue into this healthier diet?
So someone learns that they have a gluten sensitivity and they stop at the coffee shop every day on their way to work and they usually get coffee and a blueberry muffin. Now they get their coffee and they're not going to have the blueberry muffin. No, I'm going to do this, I'm gluten-free. And the next day they go in, they get their coffee and they look over there at the case of muffin. Oh, no, I'm not going to do it. And that goes on and they're doing well, they're feeling better because they're gluten-free. And one day they go in and order their coffee and they see a sign, gluten-free blueberry muffins. I can have one. As a matter of fact, they're healthy for me. I can have 2. They're not healthy for you. They're made from white paste. They have no nutrient value. It's just pure carbohydrate. It's nutrient poor, calorie dense, meaning it puts a spare tire around your midsection. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a gluten-free blueberry muffin once in a while. I have one maybe every couple of weeks. I'll have some gluten-free pastry or something 2 weeks to a month every once in a while. But you can't have that stuff every day. It's just not healthy for you, but to fulfill that craving that we have, and some of them taste really great now, but you want healthy foods to eat on a gluten-free diet? Eat God-made foods and not man-made foods.
Oh, that's good.
Now,
That's good.
my friend Dr. Terry Walls reversed her multiple sclerosis. She's a brain neurophysiologist. So she knows exactly what to do for MS. She treats lots of patients with MS. She developed MS. And 7 years into doing the cutting edge therapies, she was so bad now she's in a wheelchair, meaning nothing was working. So one of her friends said, Terry, wake up. What you're doing is not working. You're getting worse. Wake up. And so it was a reality check. So she went back to the literature and looked at animal studies and found animals with MS did much better with a certain diet. So she tried that diet, and 1 year to the day after being on the diet, she did a 25-mile bike ride.
I think I heard about her.
Yeah,
Yes.
she's great. She's great. So what's her diet? 12 cups of vegetables a day. There's no room for pasta when you have to eat 12 cups of vegetables a day, right? So that means almost no grains. 12
Right.
cups of vegetables a day, high quality meats, no lunch meat, no cheap meats.
Right, no
And
preservatives.
she did a quart of bone broth a day.
Excellent, excellent.
Make your own bone broth, so it's inexpensive, easy to do,
Yep, very easy and
and,
very healthy.
and it reverse. And she now treats our vets. She works at the VA in Iowa. She treats our vets with PTSD, chronic pain because they lost a limb. All the vets that are disabled, they can't work for whatever reason. She's treating them with this diet. They're getting better. They're getting so much better that the VA in Washington sent a team out to see what are they doing in Iowa? How are they getting such good results in Iowa? And they were so impressed that they've given Terry $1.5 million to document what she's doing to teach all the other VA centers.
That's
12
amazing.
cups of vegetables a day, quality meats, no grains. I'm not saying don't eat grains, but if you're sick, it's a really smart thing to do. We talk about it in the book quite a bit.
I think that's great. You've done a fabulous job explaining all kinds of things. And again, just let's talk about that Betrayal. So his documentary Betrayal is coming out, and you can order it online.
The links will be on your website, so people can just
Right.
click right there and go
Great.
to it. Right? It's free. It's all free. It's 7 days of listening to the world leaders about autoimmunity.
Excellent. And so really, autoimmune problems affect 1 out of 3 human beings. So that doesn't mean your neighbor down the street. It means you pretty much. So thank you very much, and for enlightening us, and for all of you listening, to please notice that when we talk about making diet changes, it's not frivolous and airy-fairy. There is really bona fide research behind it, and there are studies, and there is proof that it makes a huge difference in your ability to concentrate, your ability to learn, your ability to think clearly, and to accomplish more in life. So I hope you listen to this 2 or 3 times. Thank you very much.